As a teacher, I feel that it is so important to challenge our students to make connections between the real world and their subjects that they're learning about. The SA Water Industry Quest made the connections easy for our students to see.
Mrs McEwen informed us that we would be getting a smart meter installed at our school. All we knew was that a smart meter would track the water usage. She told us that the project would be student driven, and that was daunting for us. We were broken into groups and were given a guiding question. The rest of the journey was up to us. What we would learn, how we would learn, and the discoveries we would make were left in our hands. At first, it was unusual for us to be in charge of our own learning, but given time, we soon figured out that if we were to progress, we needed to step out of our comfort zone. We would advise our teachers of the information they needed to help us seek, what science pracs we wanted set up, and we began approaching different staff in the school to find answers to our questions.
First, we were broken down into small groups and then were given a login password for the SA Water Learning Portal. The information we were given was very basic, but a great starting point. With this information, though, we soon found out that the data wasn't adding up. More questions soon appeared for us to explore. We invited our groundsman Kevin in to talk to our class about water usage at Heathfield. When he was talking about how much water it takes to irrigate the school, we had to interrupt. Kevin, look at these graphs. We could clearly identify unusual spikes in the data at early times in the morning. Kevin had to race off and check the irrigation. He soon returned to let us know that we have helped them not only save water, but a lot of money. For some reason, the irrigation was left on even though it was winter. As a class, we felt a huge sense of achievement that we found this information and could share it with Kevin.
We never could have imagined the opportunities that would present themselves when we first started the project. Working with SA Water gave us a lot of new ways to source information and learn in detail what they do. We were given opportunities like being able to travel to the Happy Valley water plant and learn how water treatment is completed. We also got to work with other schools. After we had completed our projects and concluded on our findings, we got to present to the SA Water senior staff at SA Water House during National Water Week. We displayed what we had learned through the time that we had spent on the project. This picture shows one of the teams presenting. To be able to present our findings at SA Water, we had to refine our public speaking skills.
So how is this project innovative? Through us working with other schools and working with SA Water to explore the potential of the smart meters, we were able to create our own learning. The SA Water Smart Water Schools encourages students and teachers to consider water use at the school and develop more efficient water use practices, resulting in real savings to the school. This project was different to a normal maths lesson, realising that it wasn't a textbook question and there was no right or wrong answer, and that was okay. We were faced with challenges such as working in groups and ensuring that everyone had a voice in the team.
At Heathfield High School, we're encouraged to embrace risk and challenge, not to be put off by this. The SA Water Industry Quest was no different. It was a new concept and both of the teachers involved had no idea how the project would turn out. Was it okay if we didn't have the answers to the questions that our students asked? Was it acceptable not to actually know exactly how the week would pan out? We had to somewhat support ourselves like the colony of ants. We had to support our students to ensure that they could complete the task. We knew that there'd be risks involved in this type of teaching and learning, but the reward, it was worth the risk.
The industry quest that we completed with SA Water is an excellent example of how industries can help impact school learning by setting up programs like the one our class piloted. We got to complete hands-on experiences on how industries run and develop, learning lots along the way. We encourage industries to get involved in school learning programs and help teach students on what industry is and the aspects that come with it.
We are proud to officially announce that the pilot program is indeed being extended in 2017 to include more schools. We believe that we have had a major positive influence on this project, and to think that students are helping to drive this innovation is something that we're really excited to be a part of.
Industries may already have programs they're wanting to implement. For example, the additional SA Water program called Brainwave. The SA Water Brainwave program has close links to the Australian curriculum and also provides a range of learning opportunities for students, including interactive workshops and tours.
At Heathfield, we're always looking for ways to enhance our student learning. As a lead STEM school, we have a strong focus of working with industry partners to enhance our STEM education. Not only has Heathfield partnered with DECT through the SA Water program, we continue to work closely with Beerenberg Farm and Jurleek to provide real-world learning for our students. Innovation is really important to us, and through the SA Water program, we are able to further support our young South Australians to think creatively. Thank you to SA Water and everyone here today who have helped our students in connecting the drops.
Fantastic. Wow, what a hard act to follow. That's brilliant. I'd like to actually give those guys another hand of applause, really. Well done. Just while things are getting ready for the next of the presentations, it is really wonderful to see that intrapreneurial zeal at a high school. These young people did this in Year 8, they're in Year 9 now, and to hear a school actively pursuing industry partnerships with major manufacturers, who of course use water, is just really wonderful to see that extension on learning. From up in the hills, thank you. Also the catchment for a lot of the water we're drinking today. So speaking of water, our next presenter, Greg Ingleton, I'll just give you a few comments about him. So Greg has worked in SA Water for over 14 years, so he's clearly a comrade with our young presenters and Eden. And prior to studying environmental science, he lived in Byron and worked in quite a few agribusiness areas. And while he's been at SA Water, he's worked on a lot of non-engineering roles. I mean, actually, just out of interest, how many engineers in the room? Okay, we've got a couple there in the middle. Thank goodness you're in the middle because you can support the rest of the room and make sure it's structurally sound. I really enjoy the way engineers think, and often they're not given a lot of credit for how creatively their systems thinking links to their work. So all of the rest of you are great as well, even if you're not engineers. And one of the things that Greg focused on, Greg who's side of stage, is looking at some of the commercial opportunities around something that I think South Australia's acknowledged as a leader in, which is the use of wastewater, the use of stormwater. If we're not, we've got students plugging the leaks in the system, if we've got high value water resources that we can then use for other uses, which I'm sure Greg will talk to you about, then we're much better off as a state in this fairly dry part of the world. So I'd love you to give a big hand to Greg for his presentation.
Well, and thank you guys. I think you should be doing marketing for us. That was a great plug. Before I start, I just want to do this, and this is something about a feedback loop that you'll see later in the presentation. There we go. Excellent, thank you. Okay, on with the show. 20 seconds down. Okay, my story is about water also, but a little bit different. So the story begins. As with all good stories, the story begins on a plane with some crackers and some red wine, probably not in that bar, but it was during a flight back from Melbourne one day after attending a CRC for Water Sensitive Cities conference, and we're talking about green infrastructure, urban cooling, all of those sorts of things. And I was flying back and sitting there having my wine and crackers, and I looked out the window and I thought, everything's so brown. I mean, everybody knows that. We live in a desert country, but it's just so brown. Everywhere you look is brown. And then we flew into Adelaide Airport, and it's also brown. But right next to the Adelaide Airport, we have a wastewater recycling scheme here, which takes water into the city to irrigate the parklands and for businesses. And we have a stormwater aquifer storage scheme here, where we store stormwater about 200 metres under the ground in an aquifer system. Both systems are very underutilised. So we've got a lot of water which isn't used, which if not used goes out to sea, and we've got a big 400 hectare piece of open land. So I thought, okay, well, what would happen if you brought the two together? So I started to formulate these ideas, and thought we could turn the brown into the green. That'd be nice. So we'd cool things down, it'd look nice. People, when they fly into the airport, flying over the desert, come to Adelaide, this green oasis as you come the gateway to Adelaide. Then I started thinking about the cooling towers. If you've got cooler air, the cooling towers in the airport terminal don't need as much, don't use as much energy and water. So there's some real savings there for the airport. So I went to a meeting with some of the directors of Adelaide Airport. I should point out that's not me. The images within this presentation are representative only, and they're there to protect the identity of the innocent or the guilty. Anyway, I pitched this idea to one of the directors at the airport and said, look, imagine if you're flying into Adelaide Airport and it's green. And he said, oh, that sounds nice. And then I said, and imagine when you go out to your big letterbox out the front, you get your power bill and it's less than what you expected. And he said, do the project. So I thought, okay, I'll take that initiative and I'll do it. So I went and talked to some of the people down at the airport and did a risk assessment with them and said, look, you know, what are the issues here? What would happen if we were to irrigate the airport? And they said, birds. Birds are a problem. Interestingly though, most airports in the world have a long grass policy and they try and keep their grass long. We don't have summer rain, so we can't do it, but it keeps the birds away because they can't dig at the dirt and get the bugs and the seeds and everything in there, and the movement of the grass actually scares the birds away as well. So they said, you know, from a bird perspective, it would actually be a benefit. And, you know, this week we've had 2 bird strikes already around Australia. Not a good thing. There are issues with other wildlife on the airport causing damage to planes. There's also erosion. If you have bare earth, you get a bit of wind. That dust going into an engine on an aeroplane is millions of dollars of damage. And there's also a maintenance cost. So they're maintaining that whole area around the airport now, and it's money that they're throwing away. So what could they do differently if they had water and if they irrigated? The second part of the pitch was to my CEO, my former CEO. We're on our way to a meeting one day over in Melbourne, not quite as important as this one, and we're in a taxi, and I said to him, hey, I'm doing a trial. I want to do a trial and irrigate a small part of the airport to see if we can cool the air down and have all these other benefits. And he said, great. We got to the meeting. The first thing he said to people at the meeting was, we are going to irrigate the airport and cool the airport down. So from that I thought, great, I got some support. The next part of the process is where it gets tricky. Trying to pitch an idea like this to people in SA Water, in any industry, is tricky. People, if it's nothing that's mainstream, it's a bit difficult for people to understand. So it was a bit of a process. There were a lot of brick walls that I came up against to find that money tree to fund the project. And I reflected back and thought, the CEO supports it. I can actually just use that when I go to people and ask for funding. I say, well, the CEO supports it, so, you know, let's talk to him. Not in a threatening way, of course, but anyway. The approvals process then, so we got the money, small bucket of money, let's go do the project. Then the approvals process began. Now, an airport is a very bureaucratic area, as it should be, and there are a lot of forms that you had to fill out. There were forms that you had to fill out to get the form that you had to fill out to then do the work. So that was a bit of a process, but it was an interesting learning curve. Then I talked to the airport maintenance people and they said, well, hang on a second, if you start to irrigate the grass, that means we're going to be working harder to try and mow it. That's when I came up with the idea of, hey, well, let's grow crops. If you mow it, then you sell it and then you can pay us for the water. So they were all excited about that. So that's what we did. So we set up a trial. It's a 4-hectare trial at the airport. Now, the little stars are the weather stations to measure temperature. The wind generally comes from this direction, and across here and down here. So I wanted to measure upwind in the irrigation area and downwind as well to see how quickly the air cooled down and how persistent it was once it went away from the irrigation area. So the data, this is just one day. The arrows represent the direction of the wind, and the colour of the stars represent the monitoring stations, which are shown on this graph. There's a 3-degree temperature difference within the irrigation area compared to outside of the irrigation area. And that's in a small area. It's not very persistent when it heads downwind, and that's because it just goes back out over this, you know, desert landscape. So 3 degrees might not sound that much, but I'll tell you why it is in a second. And I've got seconds. This is another image. This is just surface temperature. So there's an 8-degree surface temperature difference between the irrigated area and the unirrigated area. So that's just the real image of that thermal image there. And this is irrigated at night. So this isn't about wet grass there, so it's cooling things down. This is about, you know, inherent cooling. So we got the project underway, went through the first year. Then I realised we've got to start promoting this. So every opportunity I had, and this is where your photo will come in the next presentation I do, I'd get up and I'd talk to people about this project, about how you could do things. Every time there was a camera pointed, I'd stand in front of it and say, hey, we can cool the airport. International and anyone that would listen, I'd say, hey, we can cool the airport. Some kids didn't, but anyway, you guys will, I'm sure. Then I talked to a pilot friend of mine, again, representation, and I said to him, what would happen if you cooled the airport down by 5 degrees? And he said, or 4 to 5 degrees. And he said, well, that's 400 foot of lift, so less thrust when you take off, less fuel use or more payload. I thought, okay, that might make a bit of money. Then I talked to a scientist friend, and he said, the runoff, if it's not going over dirt, the runoff will be cleaner when it gets into the rivers. Okay, that sounds good. Talked to a social scientist friend, and they said if the people, the baggage handlers, are happier in their job, they might actually behave better. And this guy's, you know, this is actually real. And then I talked to a customer and said, how would you like it if it was nice and green? And she said, yeah, that'd be great. So then we started looking at, okay, what would the benefits be if this was expanded to the whole airport, and basically we reduce the air temperature, reduce the energy in the cooling towers, reduce the fuel of the aeroplanes as they take off, reduce the bird risk, reduce the discharge of the wastewater and the stormwater to the sea, revenue from the sale of the crop, we're growing lucerne down there, revenue from the sale of the recycled water, so that comes to SA Water, we're happy, and cooling the adjacent residents. And it's a really good example of a circular economy where everything pays for itself within that and everybody benefits. So the next stage, this was last week, I think it was, in America. 50 flights cancelled because it was too hot. All they had to do was go out there and throw water around. They actually could have go around with a water cart and water their bitumen, and they would have been cooler. Same again. So we're actually getting some more information this year, more sensors, and using drones to do a bit more vertical profiling. We're also undertaking an economic assessment at the moment, and basically it's saying that we could save about $800,000 a year if we were to irrigate the airport. Other applications, and my time has run out. This is Adelaide Parklands. We've done a small trial down here to show that you can actually cool the air down here, but we need green strips running into the city to cool that, to move that air into the city. Suburbs are the same. Start to irrigate these small parks, then you start to get this bigger cooling effect. The main message, think outside of the box. The answers are always in front of you. You just got to look differently, look through a different lens, and barriers are really only there to stop you from getting Alzheimer's. They're fun, they're exciting, and they always come down. And that's the end.
That was fantastic. Really great to hear the circular economy getting a plug. I love the fact that, you know, Greg's talking about how to pitch an idea. Really great to think about how do you pitch it to the leadership, how do you pitch it to customers and get their input, and I think that's inherent in being an intrapreneur or an entrepreneur. I have to commend you, Greg, on the most amusing use of stock photography I've seen in quite some time. I really love that. I think that you could describe most of our days with stock photography of strangers, and I think I'll be doing that for my next slideshow at a family function. And I really like the fact that you've identified new markets out of a problem. So I think that's an excellent segue from our very entrepreneurial high school students. And so as Alex starts to make his way to the stage in a sort of a sauntery, sachet-y kind of way, Alex is a change management consultant, and he's working, I think Irma was talking about the 90-day projects in the earlier session, and he has background in the civil service in the UK, focusing a lot on how to be efficient in the Home Office. I'm thinking that might be a bit different to what I think a Home Office might be, and looking at a lot of cross-agency collaboration in his work, and now he's come over here, and he's really interested in change and the transformative aspects of that. And across a whole bunch of different fields like insurance, finance, banks and logistics around the post office and even a shipping company. So I'm really looking forward to Alex's presentation. He's got a timer here that's counting him down. I don't know if I mentioned that. So take it away. Alex, give him a big hand, please.
Thank you and good morning. Today I'm going to start talking about 90-day change and the 90-day projects. So we're going to start at looking at, press the right button, so what can we deliver in 90 days? Before we look at government, let's maybe look at some other examples. Let's look at nature. In 90 days, we can deliver pumas from conception to delivery, 90-day period. Nowadays also, 90 days, we can get a satellite into space. Coming back to Earth, 90 days with new design and fabrication methods, we can get a house in certain circumstances from foundation to finish. Then let's look at government. We ask the public often what they think you can deliver in 90 days. Their answer will be nothing, or nearly nothing. And I think we'd all agree that we've all got examples of times where the machinery of government and the cogs within it have turned very slowly. That said, there are a huge number of examples in South Australia of where people have delivered proactively, collaboratively and effectively. And a good example of that, we feel, in the Office for the Public Sector certainly, are the 90-day projects. And these are the 90-day projects. Each block represents a project that's been successfully delivered to date, 79 of them. As you heard this morning from Irma Ranieri, the now Commissioner for Public Sector Employment, it's been going since 2012 and it was only meant to run for 12 months. Over 4 years later, we're still going strong. So, what is the 90-day process? Well, it's space. It's space outside your usual working environment and your silos. It's a physically removed space, a neutral space in the example of the design workshops that we bring all projects through. It's also engagement. It's engagement of organisations and stakeholders aiming to create shared language, shared understanding and shared experience. Only when those come together can I feel you can get meaningful collaboration. In addition to that, it's also engagement of the people on the ground, those people who use your services or your end customer. Also, it's challenge. It's challenge to move away from the status quo and to listen to other opinions. Moving on to the next slide. It's a melting pot. It's a melting pot of ideas and approaches. There are lots of approaches and frameworks out there that people can use. The 90-day process helps distill those and break them down so that projects can include them in their delivery. So these initiatives, what are they? They include the Reforming Democracy agenda. They include Better Together, Delivering Together, and importantly, the public sector's values and behaviours framework. The 90 days is also structure. An important part for me is legitimacy that the projects have because the requirement to move on forward is sign-off from a chief exec or equivalent and a minister. This creates the mandate that allows people to move forward and gives freedom to work within the boundaries and just move forward without having to go to get sign-off every few minutes or weeks. It's also focus. The 90 days keeps people focused, it keeps that momentum. It's all too easy for projects to start and the various stakeholders to wander off into their own directions. The 90 days has been found to really help in this area. So what are the key elements of a 90-day project? Well, they're complex. They need to have been stuck for some time, like the cars in this traffic jam, and they require 2 or more parties to come together to solve the problem. Another key element of the 90-day projects is public value. The projects need to deliver public value. More and more, public value sits at the heart of policy delivery and policy creation, and the 90-day projects help at all stages, from solution to delivery to considering your outcomes. How are we doing against public value? So, where do 90-day projects come from? Well, they come from everywhere and anywhere. In effect, all government departments have taken forward a 90-day project. They come from the not-for-profit, they come from NGOs, they come from business, and they can even come from the public. So, let's look at a couple of examples. Starting with the road transport in the agricultural industry project that came into the 90-day process. So what did we start with? We started with a bottleneck. This is where over-regulation in that area was felt was constricting the ability of business and producers to make the most of the industry in South Australia. So the Agency for Primary Industries and Regions, Primary Producers SA, and the Department for Planning, Transport and Infrastructure came together to drive a project to address this bottleneck. So what did they do? The first stage, they brought over 20 different stakeholders together to look at what the real issues were. These were wide-ranging stakeholders. They included the RAA, local government, Pork SA, the wine industry. And by working together, what was the outcome? We went from a bottleneck to free flow. Over 50 individual projects were created as part of that 90-day project that addressed issues across the state. This included route extensions, allowing new technology to address issues, allowing larger vehicles to access the roads at night. The improvements that came from the project, its forecast will save $56 million or create value of $56 million in South Australia. So what were the key success factors? Well, over 25 stakeholders were brought together to address the problem. They managed to look beyond their own areas, stepping back to see the bigger picture. And the process helped build a joint responsibility and accountability for the issues and making a real change to them. And also the time focus of the work kept the momentum and kept people focused. So we move on to the second example. And this time, the SA Police. They came with a project focusing around body-worn video. So, is there a business case, or was there a business case for body-worn video to help address the level and fear of crime, to reduce assaults on police, and to improve the quality of evidence and therefore reduce court costs? The result has been, as people might see, the rollout of body-worn video across SAPOL, which has led to a clearer picture. In their report at the end of the 90-day process, SAPOL highlighted the following points about the 90-day process and how it helped. They said that it helped them bring together a wider set of stakeholders they would have if they'd just approached the problem on their own. They said that Change SA helped them navigate the legislative and procedural landscape. They said it helped access a wider evidence base. It turned out that PIRSA had been using body-worn video, and it helped get that information into the business case to make it more informed. And they also said the challenge from Change SA helped that business case cover more of the important details to make it a more valid business case. Finally, takeaways. Firstly, I should highlight that all of the projects that are delivered under Change SA in the 90-day process have been done so with the resources and focus of the departments. Change SA have not delivered anything there. They merely provide a structure and help to deliver. If we look at some of the key points that come from the 90-day process that we feel really sum up why it's been going for over 4 years and why it still seems to be going strong, it's the authorising environment from that sign-off that I mentioned. It's that the mandate to move forward, the freedom to move, and the mobility to just get on with it and deliver. It's the change of setting. It takes people out, sort of the day-to-day mindset and day-to-day approach to try and think about things differently. Importantly, it's simplicity. Having not been in South Australia for too long, the number of frameworks that people talk about is truly astonishing. And I think there is The problem that people analyse, reanalyse and revisit, meaning people don't move forward. The 90-day projects, there is a basic simplicity there that pushes people to just move things forward. Engagement. It encourages engagement and collaboration with various stakeholders to create a shared and single understanding. Probably most importantly, it really encourages people to talk to the end user, to try and understand how they're feeling, what they're doing, and not making assumptions. And that leads to innovative co-design, which I think is absolutely vital. And finally, most importantly, it does just get things going. The 90-day process gets a project. Yes, you break it down and discuss it, but it tells people just move forward and let's see what happens when we have a go. Because if we sit there analysing it for too long, we're lost. Final point, please do get in touch. I'd like to hear from anyone who's interested, any ideas, any projects. Happy to have a discussion. There's the email address. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex. That's wonderful to see, and I can see things emerging. We've sort of moved from natural resources into human resources, which is always a bit of an odd term. But I think maybe resourceful humans is a better way of thinking about it. And I think, I mean, there's a whole lot to take out of what Alex has been talking about. And I think, Alex, is there still a gallery of the different projects online? Is that still, yeah, so if you wanted to explore some of those projects, you can check out what the particular problem was, how did people tackle it, and, you know, the $56 million in value is a fairly serious amount of coin, so it's pretty impressive. And I like the idea of people looking beyond their circumstances, having a bit of a systemic view on things, and then applying that to their particular challenge. So, from change management into well-being management. And as Lisa Weir starts to drift forwards, Lisa's a Senior Project Officer with SA Health, and she's convening the Healthy Kids Menu Initiative, or the HKMI, which I'm sure they don't call it that. She works in health promotion and social marketing, and really wants everyone to be healthier, particularly children. Some of you may be familiar with a program called Opal, which isn't about children hunting for gemstones, though it might have something to do with that. And she'll tell you more about that. And a really interesting aspect of this is around how do you encourage behaviour change, which is where I think some of that, the psychology behind social marketing might come in. So we're doing pretty well for time, so thank you all of you presenters so far. Lisa, I'm sure you'll be stellar in that regard. Put your hands together repeatedly for Lisa Weir.
Thanks, everyone. Before I start, I really just want to acknowledge my colleagues in the Strategic Partnerships branch in Public Health. I've actually only been involved in this project for a really short amount of time, and so most of the work that I'm going to be talking about has actually come from the colleagues before me, and I thank them for that. So I'd like to start off, I'll just check that I have got the right button, yes. I'd just like to start off by you all closing your eyes, just for a moment. And I'd like you to imagine that you've actually been invited out to dinner. You're going out to dinner. It means spending time with the people you love, and you're pretty excited about that. It's special. You arrive at the venue, and you look at the menu. It looks very familiar. In fact, it's the same menu you saw the last time you ate out, and the time before that. In fact, for you, this menu never changes. It doesn't matter where you go. And this menu is the same every single time you go out for about 7 years of your life. Now, open your eyes and you get to see what's greeting you on your menu. You have a choice between chicken nuggets and chips, fish and chips, hamburgers and chips. If you're lucky, you might get spaghetti bolognese or even pizza. This is the reality for our 5 to 12-year-olds and the current menu choices that are available to them. In these very short 7 years, children learn that going out to dinner, having a treat, enjoying an occasion is forever linked with eating poor quality food. Today in Australia, we're lucky that most children born, when they're born, they're healthy. And yet within a very short 4 to 5 year period, 1 in 4 of these children will be obese or overweight. How did this happen? Is it our diet? Is it our exercise patterns? Is it how our communities are built? Is it about parenting? Well, it's actually all of these things and more. This is a map of all the factors that contribute to the obesity issue. It's a complex problem and requires a complex solution. Improving the food choices that kids have when they eat out is only one small part of that puzzle, but it's really important because it sets the cultural norms about the value that we set when we feed our children. So where did the Healthy Kids Menu initiative start? Well, it actually started with our Premier. He was our first intrapreneur. One day, while in Whyalla, he ate out with his family. He had dinner at the local hotel, who had been working with the local program in Whyalla to promote healthy options on their menu. He had a vision for this to go broader, enabling more children to have access to better choices. However, he did not want this to be a government-driven program. He requested a co-design process between government and industry. Like so many health initiatives, the solution does not actually live within the health sector. So health were tasked with bringing the right people around the table, and this included those from the hospitality industry that were prepared to work through the many barriers to this change, nutrition experts that needed to recognise that compromise would need to be made along the way, and importantly, a parent's voice that represented all ranges of parents, not just those already passionate about healthy eating. This solution was going to require equal buy-in from government, industry, and the non-government sector, as well as the community. And so the Healthy Kids Menu Task Force came together to plan a way forward. The use of an external and independent facilitator meant that no one partner was seen as the main driver, and each partner was able to be equally heard, enabling trust and relationships to build up. Industry's view or concern was that the consumer demand was not there, and so no venues would be interested in participating. So eventually we came to this conclusion that a diffusion of innovation approach was required. We would work with the innovators first, following those with the early adopters, and once a system had been developed, we would then work with the early majority and eventually the late majority, slowly building that critical mass that was required to reset the social norms around kids eating. Health also had some reservations. Obesity is complex. Was this really the best place to invest? The evidence pointed us to the fact that there was in fact a way the food system can contribute to the solution. And part of that puzzle was redesigning choices available at the point of sale. And this is where Healthy Kids Menu fits in. Despite those initial concerns, a working relationship was formalised through a working together agreement, setting in writing the contribution of all partners. Ultimately, this process took time, over 12 months, but enabled trust and relationships to build. The task force came up with a range of recommendations that balanced the needs and the desires of the health outcome with those of the needs of business, and of course they were very different. So what else was intrapreneurial? Just managing the political process, with the Premier as the champion and his desire to have Minister Vlahoff and more recently Katrina Hildyard as our political support process. Of course there were challenges. But more importantly was balancing the need of the industry, which coming from a very commercial side of the spectrum, with the health requirements. Just as an example, one of those challenges really came down to ham and yoghurt. There was quite the discussion about whether ham should be allowed on a Healthy Kids menu and within the guidelines, and whether frozen yoghurt was really an acceptable dessert choice. And while this might seem trivial, I think it demonstrates that it was quite a process to negotiate the needs of the disparate stakeholders. The task force also considered banning soft drinks within the Healthy Kids menu guidelines. I'm sure you're all aware that soft drinks contribute the most sugar and the least amount of nutrition of any choice. And so from a health perspective, it was a no-brainer, let's just ban them from the menu. But the industry had other ideas, and they had to balance their priorities and felt that this was a step too far, to the point where they potentially we were going to lose their engagement. So again, negotiation around priorities and striking a balance enabled all parties to stay engaged in the process. This is a photo that was taken at the launch of the task force recommendations. But before we got to that point, we really had to manage all the expectations of the venues, the time frame in which they could make the changes, and the capacity of the venues to make changes independently. In the end, it was clear that even for the innovators in this space, an investment in time and resources was required to establish the best process for going forward. And without this investment up front, it would have been impossible to establish a system and a program that would be acceptable to all partners. Here's some standard arguments that the task force have continually have to address, and they still do. The quotes represent a mindset about healthy eating. What is it? Who's responsible for it? And who should drive it? And there's pushback from the public as well. It really comes down to the chicken and the egg. If we build it, will they come? Or do we wait for the demand to ensure that before we take any action? The pilot enabled the early adopters to demonstrate that there were enough demand and enough drive from the industry for a range of venues, including clubs, hotels, cafes and restaurants, to commit to changing their menus to be healthier. The program has really been, as I said, a co-design process between the Hotels Association, Clubs SA, the Restaurant and Catering Association, with support from different departments within government. But we've also had great support from outside of those agencies, CSIRO, the Heart Foundation and Sprout, and these people have been able to provide that technical nutrition expertise that's required. So where are we at? We're just about to launch following our pilot, and we're hoping that following this, we'll be able to open the program up to the early majority, building a critical mass that's needed to change the social norms around healthy kids' menus. And then, of course, we need to look for the sustainability of the project. Are there opportunities for this type of project to sit outside of government and be self-sustaining? We will need to draw further on our entrepreneurial skills to look to the future for this project. And we need no more motivation than to think about the future of our children and delivering them the healthy future they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Just curious, how many parents here who've got kids that are, 15 or younger? Rightio. How many, just hold your hand up, put your hand down if you are not guilty of letting your kids eat that sort of tucker when you've gone out. So, put your hand down. No, that was a sort of double negative. Anyway, who hasn't? Because that's just fascinating, and I thought, Lisa, you introduced that really well with that sort of visualisation. It is, part of it is the choices that are made available for kids, but also a habit, which is the biggest thing to unpack, and that habitual repetition of poor choices. Great to hear about so many stakeholders being brought together, dealing with lobbyists and other vested interests, and how do you work through that, and all of the vagaries of government funding and support across the local and state government. So Lisa, thank you. And I now would like to introduce you to our next speaker, whose name is Tom Moore. Now, he's had a lot of experience with transition, and part of what he's going to be talking about, pardon me, is looking at veterans' unemployment. And he mentions that he's a veteran here, so I presume that means military service. So I'm sure he'll tell you something more about that. In fact, I can have confirmed that he's spent more than 8 years in the Defence Force, managing a team of 100 soldiers in different combat situations. He sustained a physical injury through that, and through working through that transition himself has brought him to where he is now. So the original co-founders of this project were Tom, a fellow called Luke Ricks, and a fellow, a man or a woman, I don't know, called Sam Baines. I'm sure he'll tell you more about that. Basically, this particular venture is really focused on reducing unemployment for veterans. So I would really love it if you gave a warm welcome to Tom, and let's hear what he has to say.
So I had a whole presentation planned, but I spoke to your team before I came up, and what I'm really going to focus on is a journey. All right, I'm just going to talk about the journey any entrepreneur, problem solver. I just like to think of them as thinker-doers, right? They're all just titles. At the end of the day, you think about something and then you build up the courage to do it. So what I'm going to do is don't worry too much about anything up here. I'm just going to talk first about a few numbers. Numbers I've found growing up is like a unified language. Everyone can quantify a number. I know that sounds pretty silly, but so I want you to just think. There's two sets of numbers I'm going to give you, and I'm going to talk about them at the end of the presentation. First number is 4,192, 2,880, 306, and then separate that again on the other side of your page. And the other number I'm going to talk about is 6 again, 17, 45, 4.2 million, and 500. It's not really important at this point, but I've never described myself as an entrepreneur ever. I never thought I would get to the point where I have a company that's worth $7 million in 4 months. And I'm not bragging that, I just didn't think it would happen. I just wanted to solve a problem. And I got obsessive with the problem. But I'll tell you how I got there. Becoming a change agent internal to government, running any sort of project, building something from, being a builder, really requires two phases. Sometimes they interact and sometimes they don't. The two phases that you go through are resilience and using a systems approach to solving problems. It's something that engineers and everyone else appreciates probably more than most people. But utilising humans, they're a system. And if you don't understand that you need to apply transformational leadership to get humans to do something, then they don't do it. So in terms of resilience, my journey starts with resilience. I grew up in Western Sydney. I actually spent 3 years here as part of the Defence Force, which is why I'm back. And low socioeconomic family, all my front teeth are fake. And when you graduated high school, it was go to the Defence Force or continue to drug deal and end up in prison. And I lost 2 of my mates by the time I was 18. So 3 of us joined. As part of that journey, I realised, hey, I'm actually a little bit too smart to just be a door kicker. I was just a rifleman. So I went to university whilst I did it, and then went to Royal Military College at Duntroon. And I did the interview process. And at university, I came 3rd out of 500. And they're like, what, do you want to be an officer now, Tom? I go, well, I've had a lot of shit ones. I think I can do it better than them, pardon my language. But I had a lot of bad ones. I failed my officer selection board 6 times on that day. And they did not want me to be an Australian officer. I can tell you right now, I'm too rough around the edges. I don't play by the rules. All of a sudden, they asked, why should we take you? And I go, and at this point I exposed that I did 100 sit-ups 3 hours earlier with broken ribs because this is the only thing I want to do. I didn't think about anything at the time, but I did. It's what I wanted. I wanted that goal. I wanted to lead soldiers in combat. And then I deployed to Afghanistan at 23 and led a 60-man combat team in Kandahar, which is the home of the Taliban. And you're 23. If you think that we apply an authoritarian leadership model to fight a human intelligence battle, electronic warfare battle, you've got $1.8 billion worth of air assets above your head, and anything that I do wrong goes on the front page of any newspaper. If you think that we can only apply an authoritarian model to run a military unit, you're in the wrong game. An Australian soldier, essentially, if you ask them to do something, they'll ask you why. So you integrate them into your approach. And I learned that focusing on systems in a counterinsurgency environment and adaptive problem solving, utilising a systems approach is the only way you can get things done, and you can get things done faster. There's a phrase that's used in the military which is along the lines of, a good plan doesn't survive first contact. No. An excellent plan already anticipates that contact and already has a system that's reacting to it before you need to make a decision, so therefore you can think 3 days ahead. So I left that, and the reason I left is back to resilience again. I was 25, this is the job that I wanted to do my whole life, my legs sort of stopped working. I've got the legs of a 90-year-old man here down, it's pretty much dust, I can only walk for a few more years. And I paid for my own stem cell, because there's no way I'm losing my job. This is what I want to do. And as part of that journey, they put me in a role terminating people from the Australian Defence Force. I terminated 420 people, voluntary and involuntary, within 12 months whilst doing 4 hours of rehab a day, and then my partner died of a heart attack. And at this point, my legs didn't get better. And it was the first time my ambition had trumped my ability. I couldn't do that. So I gave up. I was diagnosed with depression, I was suicidal, and I got discharged out of the military. And then I went out of the military, and I stepped out, and all of a sudden I applied for 100 jobs. And I've managed 100 men. I've done millions and millions of dollars of projects, and I couldn't even get a role running close personal protection for CBA as just a junior team leader. Now, the funny thing about that is I trained the AFP the year before, and the AFP trains them. Something wrong with the system. And the problem that veterans face is this, and I'll harp back on the problem. There's a 30% unemployment rate for veterans in Australia. There's 5,500 that leave a year. That means 5,500 people have a 1 in 3 chance of not getting a job. And then you look at their training value. They've got $2.5 million worth of training value and years of experience. If you don't think we have agile project managers, then you wouldn't understand that Prince 2 was actually created off military doctrine. This has been now shifted to agile, and it's just our military appreciation day-to-day under a higher intent. So we do have all these things. But there was 2 systemic problems that we couldn't get past. The first is if you have a 30% unemployment rate, you cannot solve that through charity. You have to use market forces. So we built a competitive solution that essentially trained people and predicted the labour market. And the reason I started to predict the labour market is that I worked out that I knew nothing about human capital, nothing about recruitment, nothing about AI, nothing about technology, but I knew that my guys were well-trained, could easily perform in all the jobs I saw in industry. So we built a model that said, all right, if recruitment is reactive and everyone hires the same talent pool 20% more 8 weeks later than they should, which is a common problem faced outside of veterans, it's not just veterans that have this issue in career transition, then why don't I just predict the market 3 to 6 months before? I train them as part of their transition out of the Defence Force. And I'm the only one with the supply. And the supply matches the demand. So whether or not talent acquisition want to hire them, they have to because there's no one else left and we're cheaper than everyone else. So what that meant, and as part of that journey, you had to be resilient. I quit my job, sold my car, didn't pay myself for 12 months as part of that journey. I had a ridiculous amount of no's, some yeses, but I spoke to every state government, I spoke to every charity that operated veteran employment program, and I said, take the technology, and everyone said no. So I said, stuff it, I'm going to do it. And there's something that I learned in the military that you should apply in any government organisation, is sometimes you just need to ask for forgiveness and not permission. All right? Take that away and do whatever you want with it, but I've done that my whole life, and I seem to end up all right somewhere. And we started to train people for companies, and then Northrop Grumman started to cold call me. Amazon cold called me. Google cold called me. And I'm like, where's your office? Well, at this point, I didn't have any tech. We were predicting the market without tech. So I said I was a tech startup. Everyone else is a tech startup. Why can't I be a tech startup? So I started to build a site, and it looks like I'm a tech startup, because then I worked out no one had actually asked me how the tech worked, and I already knew what the skill translation was. So we started to talk about this tech startup. And then everyone wanted to work with the tech startup that would work out how to predict their labour market and how to get veterans into jobs. So then they said, all right, let's try it. And they go, oh, we want to hire one veteran, Tom. Just give us a veteran. And you give them a veteran, but because we put them through our process where we've made them highly competitive, deployable, they've got a purpose, and they're coming out of the transition to do this, they just got a better person. And this is the best thing about a systemic, systems approach. They'll go, oh, we love Brett. We love Brett, don't we? He's not a veteran anymore, he's Brett. Doesn't matter that Brett served 12 years in the SAS. Doesn't matter that stuff doesn't matter anymore. We just want more Bretts. And here's the best thing about the military. We build people in a system to match that need. And that's when it got harder and easier at the same time, because you have more demand than you ask for, so you have to build a system internally to get it done, and you have to influence people. And before I sort of go into that, if you don't understand, one of the biggest parts of this whole process of getting something done and being a thinker-doer is transformational leadership. And that is looking at your team as a human, being a constant learner in that process, and motivating them to drive forward using systemic approaches to do it. And to take you back to the numbers, what does that sort of mean? So that's the sort of stuff we do up there, right? So I predict the internal, the trend, I identify the labour gap, then I match 6 months out while people are still in the military, so they're still in, and then I train them for that gap, and then I link them into a company. But to go back to the numbers, the first numbers I gave you are in terms of resilience. Just for the With You With Me journey, I made 4,192 pitches, and every single one of those pitches where I had depression, I was told we didn't want to hire veterans because they have a mental health problem. Only 2.2% of the military workforce discharging has a mental health problem. So I had to sit there 4,192 times and listen to that and explain when I was dealing with it myself. 2,880 is the amount of hours I worked within 4 months. to get it running effectively. 300 is the amount of people we've already placed. And every single time that we were asked, we had to do 10 hours of work for each person. And 6 is really the amount of months it's been in operation. On the other side, in 6 months, I've employed 17 employees. I'm across every capital city in Australia. We have 45 enterprises that are at the top of like Uber, Amazon, Google. We've made 350 placements that are paid for and 300 that weren't as part of that journey to get us in the door. We've done $4.2 million worth of revenue in 4 months. And I'm bringing 500 jobs to South Australia in the next 12 months. We're using this exact same model and working with the South Australian government to do it. So the key points out of all this, it's not really talking about it in general, but there's sort of 3 things that I would take away. Resilience and using a systems approach to problem solve are the only ways you get things done. And as part of that approach, you have to ask for forgiveness sometimes instead of permission. And that's it. Thank you for your time.
All right, I'm feeling like a slacker. Anyone else? That's fantastic, Tom. And I really enjoyed the fact that you threw a whole bunch of numbers out there. So my brain was sort of going, okay, I'll remember those numbers, they're going to be important. And really just the states of mind that we bring ourselves into when we're dealing with a problem and all of the things that carry us through life. So it's really great to have that storytelling behind it. And I must commend all the presenters today on their storytelling. I only have one more presenter left, which is where you all go, aww. And the last presenter is David O'Loughlin, Mayor David O'Loughlin. And I'll tell you a little bit about him. He's a Piri boy, and he worked there in a family where they're builders, a lot of labourers and tradespeople, so, you know, rigid-edge blue collar. And he, down here in Adelaide, he's done work with major projects with Housing SA and Renewal SA for about 5 years, ending up in about 2013. He's been in local government for rather a while as Mayor of the City of Prospect, which has undergone quite a bit of transformation. I think some of what David's going to be talking about will sort of shed some light on that. And he's also been very involved in the Local Government Association. He's currently the National President of the various local government associations across the country. So let's listen to what David has to say about dumps. Welcome, David O'Loughlin, please.
Well done. Thank you. Well, there's been some great presentations, and I thought I'd come here and talk about something pretty mundane. Not a dump, but what our locals used to call the road to the tip. And I thought if I use the word tip, you might wonder what that was. Dump sounds much better, doesn't it? It's tactile, you can smell the breeze, you can hear the flies. And Churchill Road was seen by many as just a pretty ordinary heavy freight route that led to Wingfield, and Wingfield where you go to stick stuff in a big pile and someone else buries it for you back in the good old days, you know. And if you're like me, you remember that going to the dump was actually a family outing. It was always was fun. Had to be careful not to bring more back, but those days are pretty much gone now. But Churchill Road had a very poor reputation, and not just its visual appeal, but as an investment location, it was not on the radar at all. As a place for people to live, it was seen as being pretty down at heel. It was only when I later pointed out that it is our longest street in the city of Prospect. In fact, more people live on Churchill Road than any other single street in the city, that we started thinking differently about that particular road. So here's how we went about changing it. The first thing was that in my 2006 election campaign to go from councillor to being a mayor, I made it highly political. I thought it was unacceptable that nothing had really been done down there for 50 or 60 years. You can't really see from the image there, you can see a bit of water, but there were no curbs and gutters, something as simple as that. It was just pushed up rollover asphalt. People were parking on the verges, they were creating holes and things all over the place. It was impossible to get landscaping started. We even featured on Today Tonight for fining people for parking their cars half on the bitumen and half on the dirt. Not that it mattered to anybody, but it was illegal. And so we were annoying people with our lack of infrastructure. It looked terrible. It had received no attention. Why was that? Because council said it was too hard. The state government owned the arterial roads and councils owned the verges and people owned their own properties. This particular road had a property boundary adjustment for some of the allotments years ago as part of the match plan to make the road wider. State government had stopped purchasing land about, I don't know, 20 years before I got hold of this issue. But the property boundaries went in and out and the road hadn't been formed properly because no one could determine how wide it needed to be or was going to be. I said, well, that's just not good enough. We can't sit on our hands and do nothing about this. So I got elected. It was a very strong result, so people clearly agreed. First thing is to identify obstacles. If you want to bring about change, what's in the way? One was the mindset. People accepted Churchill Road for what it was. I didn't, and I know the people who lived on it didn't want to accept it for what it was. Second was this lack of direction about how wide or how important this road should be. Well, who determines that at the time? Was this bloke, Pat Conlon. So I simply made a meeting with him within 2 months of gaining office and said, listen, Pat, are you going to make this road a 4-lane road with a protected right-hand turn, or is it just going to stay as a single? He turned to his department head and he said, and? No plans for 20 years. I said, good. Can you get out of our way? We want to landscape it, and if you ever do make it wider, do you promise that you'll put back what we've just done? He said, that's a fair deal. That was a 10-minute conversation that transformed council's thinking about the inertia around this road. So identify the obstacles and get them out of the way is my tip. The next thing was, how do we actually engage people in this change process so that we just don't go and rebuild a whole environment in people's front yards? And the team at council were very keen to engage a designer and to do some drawings and then have a nice town hall meeting with biscuits and ask people what they thought. I said, please don't do that. Because as soon as people see a drawing, they assume that that's locked in. They don't think it's flexible. Don't do a drawing, send people a letter, invite them to think about what matters, send them a little survey that says, here's what we think are the top 6 things that are pretty bad about this road. If you agree, say so. If you don't, there's another spot you can tell us what you think matters more. And by the way, do you want to be part of this process? So put your hand up if you're interested in being part of a small group to think about how we go forward. The letter was a huge success. It cost 4/5 of not much, and we got a little group of people out of that were really passionate, and we nailed the issues that then became the brief for the design team. In fact, we went to a master plan approach rather than a design approach first. We really wanted to think more holistically about this road. So instead of it being just about curbs and gutters and landscaping and footpaths and basic infrastructure, we were challenged at council by a really good CEO who said, do you understand that you could do a lot more than just make this look like a road? So we put out a brief and engaged a consultant who did a fantastic job and eventually came up with this vision. Now bear in mind I said this was a heavy freight route to Wingfield, okay? It still is a heavy freight route to Wingfield, but if you've been down that way, you'll see things have changed a little, and I'll show you some images. That's because we adopted this as our vision. It doesn't say heavy freight route in there anywhere, but it does say Transport Boulevard. So we said we have a much higher vision for this road, but we're not going to wait for someone to declassify the heavy freight use of this road. We can't control that. What we can control is how we think about it, how we invest in it, and how we change people's perceptions about this road. So this was a very pivotal moment for us. The other thing that the master plan consultant said to us was, this is a great location to have increased density. You've got a train line with 3 stations just one short block away. You've got a bus route on Churchill Road, and in fact the government have just decided to line mark it for a bike lane. Why don't you think about increasing it as a place for people to live? That really challenged us, and we thought, well, to do that, we need to transform it visually as well as functionally. Nothing better than having, a photo taken for the local paper. You can see the asphalt curb by my boot there, steel cap, had the right gear. It's really important to show people that when change is happening, that it's tactile, that they can get hold of it, they understand what it means. Get beyond the drawing and show people what you're talking about. And people, funnily enough, they want heroes, they want leaders, they want people to stand up and show them where they're going to go and commit to it. So that was my job. I did that. in the document that we produced, we had images not just about the landscaping and the configuration of the road, but also about the type of built form we were envisaging. Now, Churchill Road was characterised by single-storey bungalows. To have drawings like this appear in a master plan document and put them in front of the community really forced them to think hard about their perceptions about this road. And that became quite interesting. Many people said, by all means, make it look pretty. So we did. And with all these change processes, I have to say, not only did we want to make it look pretty, and we did, but many of the plants we chose didn't survive. So we had to go back 18 months later and redo them. Because remember that the vision for this road was to be an attractive boulevard for people to want to live on. And if the plants don't work the first time, go and do them again because you haven't achieved your objective. So an important part about change is it's not always perfect the first time, just go and do it again. People will hold with you on the key objective, not the outcomes. But getting back to the planning issues, by the time we got to those being in front of people's minds, we had another election on our hands. And politics again came to the fore. So I had to go and do a battle in the electoral heartland in Councilville to say, you know what, we can have buildings taller than a chook house along main roads. We can have buildings as high as 4 stories. Well, I won the election, but it was a tough fight because in council elections it's not compulsory, it's voluntary. So the people who vote are always the people who are upset, and the people who love what you're doing often think, well, that's just going to happen anyway, I don't need to bother. So you have to motivate people to get on board. It was quite a difficult job. Because what was happening was people could see what was already there on the left-hand side of the image. They thought what we wanted to do was what was in the middle, high-rise, and they actually had a brochure out that actually said that during the campaign. And what we actually wanted to do was what was on the right-hand side. And communicating this through graphics in an election context is extraordinarily difficult, I have to tell you. But it's important because what it meant was when I won the election and the council came together, we had a clear response from the community about what they were sensitive to, and we could move forward working on that. Ultimately, we had a development plan handed down that did 2 important things. It kept heights to a minimum. So with all the corridors that were rezoned, we were the lowest height increases. But it gave us huge scope, and we pushed very hard to have as many kilometres as our road frontage done as possible, and that's what happened. We had 17.5 kilometres. We produced an investment document to attract business to the area. We even took this to China and invited Chinese investors to come down. This is a photo actually on Churchill Road. And success looks like this. You had a cafe just open up where there'd never been one before on Churchill Road, a really groovy cafe. And we had sporting teams crawl over themselves to get the winter licence that come up on one of our ovals, and so now we have a huge amount of activity at that space. We had people actually build apartment buildings, lots of them. And now we're getting to finessing designs to things that we know the community are more interested in, less slabby and more interesting designs. The local parks have been more activated as well. And as I say, if things aren't right the first time, keep going. So what's happened now is we've said to the Minister, we weren't happy with the original design guidelines around the planning changes that we made, and we want to improve them. So only after only 3 years, the Department and the Minister have agreed to open that up. We are now leading the corridor design and planning agenda. And we have this out for public consultation now, and the public consultation is going really well. People now accept that 4 stories is the new norm along our main roads, and they want to make them the best that they can be. It's a very different place to where we were at the last election. And in fact, here's an excerpt from the letter, just indicating that even the Minister himself sees Churchill Road and the City of Prospect as leading this agenda. So we've gone from a road that was the road to the tip, as I said at the outset, to a place that people are choosing to live in and invest in. They're making it their homes, or they're making it part of their investment portfolio. And we are now leading the charge on writing new policy and design guidelines for the entire state. It's an extraordinary turnaround, and I thought I'd give you some insight into how we've done that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Fabulous stuff, and great to get a linkage between being a builder and working in urban planning, and then taking that through a political process and mobilising a community, and then bringing 4-storey buildings, so that's much higher than a chook house, to life along a main road, and what that activates in a community. Now, We are at this wrap-up point, so first of all, I would like just one more big round of applause for all the people who've been up front. And I've been informed to inform you that there's more talking and wonderful stuff in a different room. It's the Magarey West room, and there are actually 3 areas that you can go to. I'm just double checking. There's basically a session in Magarey West called Network Intrapreneurship, an emerging opportunity for South Australia. And then just while you're sort of thinking about moving, there are 3 sessions following lunch, and I just wanted to mention those to you so you can count them on your fingers. So in that same room, there's Dan Butler will be facilitating an entrepreneur as innovation catalyst. Try saying that after 7 beers on a Friday night. So that'll be about hacking the bureaucracy and about innovation labs. So that's in the William Magarey room, West, after lunch. This is on your programs, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. In the Premiership Suite, I don't know how Alex Taylor managed to get that because that sounds pretty fancy, but Alex Taylor will be the MC for a session entitled Entrepreneur Getting Your Message Heard. So we heard a lot of presenters just now talking about how they pitched an idea. So how can you be a pitch ninja? And Thomas Sadowski and Professor Eddie Blass will be the ninjas in residence. I can't believe they wrote this stuff here, it's crazy. And then in the William Magarey Room East, the other side of Alex, Kristen Alford, who's your MC for the day, she'll be talking about creating an open school and extreme entrepreneurship. So you might need body armour, you might need an open mind, and that's dealing with the Botanic High, which is still a school name that a lot of people find amusing, and Cezanne Green and Deb O'Reilly will be presenting there. So anyway, off with you. I'd like to thank everybody who's participated once again. Thank you, IPAA, for bringing everyone together, and enjoy your networking entrepreneurship forum and lunch.